Thanks, Chidi, for coming in and having a conversation with us about taxes, which I don't know, sometimes people don't think so highly of it, but I think it's a necessary thing for us to discuss. So thanks for coming on and sharing your time with us.
No, thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. So let's dive in just a little bit about your story. I think it's fascinating how you kind of ended up here. So if you want to share with the listeners how you got to where you are.
So my journey has been sort of a long-winded journey in the sense that I studied business, and then after studying, it was then time to find a job, and I found a job, the first job I could find, which was putting invoices into a system. And then from then on, I I wanted security. So I wanted a profession that would always pay me a certain amount of money no matter what. And accounting just seemed like a place. I like numbers. So accounting seemed like a good place for me. So that's how I ended up being an accountant. And then it was you're striving for more and better. And financial services seemed to be the place where you can work in some of the big firms in the world. I was fortunate to work in some of the really great firms, JP Morgan and the like. And and there you learn at a different level, not just in how you conduct yourself and how, but essentially how businesses run and how big businesses and big business individuals or people make decisions. And that was a real insight for me in that we talk about how we work virtually in COVID, but we were doing that before COVID. We were hot desking before COVID. And so, and people, when it's time to make big decisions, they bring the data, they bring the information, the summary versions, they bring the PowerPoints. And that's drove when it came down to wanting to do my own thing. That was a key part of it is how can we get business owners to use the data from the business to make key decisions.
Yeah. I think it's fascinating because I think if you have worked in a 9 to 5, which most of my clients, and this kind of is where I came from the finance world and I helped my family's construction business. So i- if you have worked in that space, it's very much so kind of like school, versus when you go and you become an entrepreneur, it's almost like a complete 180 in terms of how you have to make decisions. And when I say how you have to make decisions, what I mean is like nobody's standing over you telling you what to do. Like you have to make your own decisions on yourself. You have to trust yourself and you have to take risks. I don't want to say have to, but you take risks, you try shit and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And I don't think schooling prepares you for entrepreneurship in that way.
100%. And I think for me as a business owner, that was one of I'd say that it was a hard bit I had to learn the hard way, which is when you're faced with a decision, whether it's your software, whether it's your staff, whether it's your clients, and there's no one else. I mean, if
Yeah.
you're fortunate if you have a co-founder or partner, business partner, you can bounce ideas with. But if you don't, you just have to really make those decisions.
Yeah. And I think it comes back like it's a lesson, I think, in self trust. Like you really have to trust yourself. And I think it's a lesson in self love too, right? Because when shit doesn't work out, you have to be like, it's okay. I've got
Yeah,
you. We're going to figure it out together,
yeah,
your mind and your body and your all the things. But I think that that is something that you can read all the books that you want, but there comes a point where that internal work of being there for yourself, of trusting yourself, of doing it, and like the way that you do it is how you learn to ride a bike, right? Like you just do it and you get data and you make decisions based on what you've experienced versus I think sometimes we want to iterate in our mind, like we want to think of all the things before we make the decision versus just making a decision. What did we get for the result? Making another decision, just moving on down the road that way.
and that becomes your new norm. It
Yeah.
just becomes your new norm. You think of what's the problem, how do I fix it? What do I
Yeah.
need to do? Is this a big deal or not? And how many options do I have?
Yeah.
choose one and move on,
Yep. Yeah. Because you can get in, I call it like in the head, right? Like you can get so heady about stuff of like, well, which one? And then you sit and then you're just stuck in indecision versus just making a decision. Because really what we're trying to do is avoid a feeling, right? When we make
Yeah.
it, if we in our, mind of like making a bad decision, right? And so it's just making a decision and then seeing what the data is and then moving forward. I would love it if you would talk about, because before the podcast hit record, we talked about starting, having, and growing a business. So I love it when I can get behind what I call like you're behind your laptop and
Yeah.
you get to share what you see on your side, because I think there's our side as a business owner, and then there's the CPA or the financial advisor or things of that sort. So from a standpoint of someone starting a business, what do you see and what would you say, hey, I've seen this 100 times. Let me save you some time, or these are my suggestions, or things of that sort.
So let me answer that with an example, right?
Yeah.
There was a business owner who I met maybe about 3 years ago, and this business owner, it was sort of like a cafe that they
Mm-hmm.
had, and that cafe was niched towards young moms. And maybe there's too much information here, but essentially what we're saying is that this cafe had a playpen area in the
Okay.
unit, right? Which sounds great. It sounds great. Great idea. Moms can come together, have coffee, and have the kids playing, and it's fantastic. But from a business owner, if we sit down and we say, look, how much money do you need to make from this, right? And then we then flip that on, well, how many coffees or cakes does this business need to sell to give you what you need to make? Then you'd realize that actually this niche is not going to do that.
Yeah.
So it's rethinking, or asking questions about the model or the approach that we've chosen
Mm-hmm.
to make sure it's right. Because sometimes it sounds good. I want to own my own this, or I want to be my own boss, or I want to do this. But have we really let's really think about and plan around this solution or this that we're offering, whether it's a product or service, and to see whether it's worth going down.
The word that came to mind is fantasize. Like, I think sometimes we can fantasize about our business being a certain way. And
Yeah.
I think we do this with all relationships. Like, our business is just another relationship, right? But we have this fantasy of like what this business is going to do for us versus m- meeting that need on our own. And then, like you're saying, just like, okay, really, in order to live the life that you want to live on the money that you want to create, you're going to have to sell XYZ. Like, is that a legit, realistic thing to
Yeah.
do? And so, how can if it's, yes, we want to do business, we want to have a business that is fun and enjoyable. And also, can you get that side of it somewhere else? Maybe what that
Mhm.
person's trying to do versus, okay, if you want to have a coffee shop and that's what you want to do, and I think it's also when I say fantasize, it's like looking at both sides, right? Like there's parts of business that aren't so fun, right? And
Yeah.
just acknowledging that when you start out, like there are things that you're going to do that you're going to feel resistance to, but that's just part of being in business, being a business owner.
No, exactly. But I always say, and it's always funny coming from me, the accountant, because people expect it from me. But I say let the numbers guide us. The numbers would show us the path. And so when we talk about this, my point earlier on around this example is the numbers could do one of two things. The numbers would either deter us and say, look, no, this is not going to work. Scrap it. Go and think of something else to do, or the numbers will say, okay, you can do this, but to get this, you must do this. And
Yep.
by that, I mean the kind of clients or customers that we go for, the costs that we incur, the
Mhm.
investment, right? The
Yep.
investment that we put in, because it
Yep.
might mean that actually, if you need these many clients, we need to invest in some marketing to get access, because just word of mouth is not going to give you that. So it forces our decision making, either for or against. And if we're going for, it just means that we may be pitching at a different level than if we hadn't done this analysis.
Yeah, I love that because I was having a conversation with another CPA and he does more so franchises and he kind of ran the numbers for a client and they were talking about like that they didn't do fountain drinks and that was what the CPA was thinking is like, "Hey, this is a great opportunity." And just like you're saying, it's not that you have to do it. It's just if you decide to do it, then this is what it's going to look like. And the client was
Yes,
like, I don't want to do fountain drinks. I don't want to mess with that. So they figured out another way to increase profitability. So it's not saying it can't be done. It's just
correct.
recognizing, okay, this is what it is if we're going to continue down this path. And so like you said, for or do we need to pivot or do something different?
Exactly.
So what are
Exactly.
some other things for, new starting business owners that you typically help like brick and mortar or is it online or is it kind of a whole range of clients?
So it's a good question. We've got a whole range of clients, but we I find that the tech world, you know, we kind of we're like brothers and sisters, We like tech. We're fans of being cashless, and we have ambitions for growth because in tech the growth can be quite rapid, or
Mhm.
it can be quite ambitious. And they understand the value or the need of data. So I just find that we're a good fit, but ultimately we we still marry on with a lot of different sectors. I
Yeah.
just find sometimes when it would also depend on the client, or or the business owner, because some people are not open to data.
Mm.
They're not open, or maybe they're not as literate or comfortable with using a computer. And so clients like that would struggle to kind of give you the kind of value that we feel that you should be getting.
Mm. That's also something else, it's interesting because we sometimes we don't look at that and think, "How can we improve?" We look at that and think like that is part of who we are.
Yeah.
Meaning, like, okay, I maybe not be good with QuickBooks. I might not be good with reading reports. And then we make that mean something about us and our capability versus that's just another language that hasn't been taught to a lot of us. And I think it's kind of been complex on purpose. And so, versus, okay, this is just something else I'm going to need to learn so that I can from an empowered place, look at my numbers, talk to my advisors from a very independent and empowered place. And it doesn't mean I'm not smart. It doesn't mean anything about me. It just means this is the language that they speak in all day, every day, and I do not.
Man, that gave me goosebumps because and I think the important thing is, as a business owner, you've got to be comfortable understanding how the business is doing. I know you're not an accountant, a bookkeeper, but there's got to be a middle ground where, rather than just putting your hands up and saying, look, you just do it and just tell me what I need to do, you have to find a way of coming to the party and understanding how my business is doing. So just they need to, however they do it, they need to give you that number or the information in a way that's clear enough for you to understand, or simple enough for you to understand, should I say. And that's the best way. And likewise, as you say, Erin, we've got to start to understand this new language, and companies and business owners that are not keen to understand data or have financial processes implemented in their business, they get slowly left behind, and they run the risk. Sounds a bit scary, but they run the risk of going bust.
So I think that there's two sides to this coin. I think the one side of the coin is because we have thoughts and beliefs about ourselves of typically what I have found is either you didn't go to college and you're just like, I'm going to just build this business, or you did go to college and you're like, okay, I'm tired of the 9 to 5, or I'm tired of this high corporate or whatever it is, and I'm going to start my own business. And we have lots of thoughts around being smart
Mm.
and asking questions. And, if we ask questions, then we make that mean we're stupid, or we make that mean that, we don't understand, versus dropping the little ego that we have and just
Yeah.
being like, I'm here to learn. And I think that's one side of it. And I think the other side is, I think that the financial banking industry has complicated terms on purpose to need people. I 100% think that we need advisors and, accountants and all of that. But
Mhm.
when we come at it from that place of, oh, they know more than me, then we, like you're talking about, we almost abdicate our power and our responsibility. It's like, oh, well, I hear that all the time with clients, like, oh, my CPA is taking care of it. It's like, no, 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 time out. That is not no longer an acceptable answer, because yes, they might ultimately do your tax return, but you have to know your numbers. You've got to be able to get in there inside and out. And you might say, oh, well, that's not really what I enjoy doing, but nobody's going to take care of your business the way you are.
Nobody. And especially when there's there are parts of the business, because you're like at the forefront. So it's
Hmm.
always like in a no, I don't want to talk about war here, but in a war, someone's at the front
The for
shooting, but you kind of need to have an eye on how much ammo and how much and what's going on at the back to be able to do a great job, right? In the front. So you can't abdicate the 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 role completely, even though someone's looking after the back. But you need to come closer to that person and have a language that you understand, right? So that you can get the information that helps you as you run your day to day.
yeah.
I like
I,
that
I think my dad and I used to, like I did all the financials and all the, I did all the stuff that he didn't necessarily enjoy doing, but I was like his right hand guy. And we would always say, like, all of your numbers are like the pulse, the pulse of the business. Like, you've got to keep a pulse on your business. And you were the first person, like, that is the fastest, like, I mean, that's such a good analogy, because it's like,
Mm.
by the time the CPA gets to it, that might be months behind, right? Like,
Yeah.
and months, depending on your size of cash flow, decide of, depending on your cash reserves, like all that could be a huge thing. Months could be something that could be really, I don't like the word detrimental, but I mean,
Yeah. Could be
it
critical.
could, right? And so,
Mm.
really, I always go back to, like, why don't you want to look at it? And sometimes it comes back to the numbers don't represent what you want them to. And then you're making them mean something about you, versus like what you're saying is, it's just data. It's just,
Yeah.
if you were to say there's however many postcards instead of money, how would we feel differently about the conversation? But
Mm.
we put the word money on it, and or profit or loss or whatever, and we become all squirrely with it. So it's really recognizing, like, the, I call it the 3D part, right, of the reports and things of that, and also the emotional side that you feel with money and your business and what you're making it mean about you. Like, how many clients make their business mean something about them? Do you have
No,
a
no,
lot of
no, no, no. And it's a valid point, but I think it's similar to how when you have a baby crying, and when a baby cries, if as a parent you feel if you feel emotional about it because it's like how my baby's crying, I need to do something about it. But once you're able to almost treat it as a job and just say, okay, what does this cry mean? Do is a baby need food? Does a baby need is a baby cold? Is a baby and then you you would deal with things differently because you're just focusing on understanding and finding solutions. And that's how I see it.
Yeah, it's like we're problem solving. That's what we're
Yeah,
doing.
100%.
Right. So, in terms of helping clients when they're first starting out, wanting to start a business, what are some of, like, maybe the top three things that you would say, listen, I've seen this so many times. This is what I would ponder or Yeah, some advice that you might have.
So one of the things that you want to understand from a business owner is where they're going, where's the destination. Because, like for instance, if a pilot gets in a cockpit, he's thinking about where am I going? Am I flying to New York? Probably going the wrong direction from you, but am I flying to New York? Am I going to Germany? Those things um, would form different parts. They'll take different parts, and they would require different resources, different foundation, should I say? And so, being clear on that, and a lot of business owners aren't actually clear. Surprisingly, they start off a business, but you don't actually know where that business is going. You don't know how big it needs to be. You don't know how many staff you end up having to support it. But if once you're clear around those things, then it then becomes important to then lay the foundations accordingly to support that, right? And so, what kind of systems do we need? What kind of, what services do I need to bring in to support me? And those things are, it's always easier and better for you, especially when you're thinking about growth, especially when you're thinking about selling the business one day. Laying those foundations at the forefront is always key.
Do you think that that comes back to just let me hurry up and just start my business and make money, and they're not slowing down to ponder kind of like that 30,000-foot view? Like, where do you think that that comes from?
Well, I think that when you think of the mind of a business owner, is you're thinking the main bit is like I can picture these blue sweaters. You're like wearing a sweater cardigan. I want to make these blue cardigans. I want them to look like this. I want them to look like this. I want to get the product, the material from here. I want to get this. I'm going to sell it here. I'm going to sell it there. That's a lot. And that's the focus of what, and it's no, look, there's no surprise. That is number one. That's priority. But then maybe you haven't thought about those next steps.
Mhm.
Where is this going? Do I want to be in store? Do I want to be my own main brand? Do I want to all these things?
Mhm.
And not and so they think, okay, I'm going to start this first, and then I'll figure it out, you know.
Mm.
And then you
Mhm.
start and you get bogged down, and then you don't actually, and surprisingly to find business owners that are trading. They've started their trading, and you ask them how much turnover they made, how much turnover they want to make in 3 years, and it's like a surprise, because you haven't thought about these things. And when you haven't thought about these things, you haven't laid the foundations.
I always say, I think in the beginning, here we go back to like the 9 to 5,
Mm.
you are acting more like an employee than you are an employer or the
Yeah,
CEO. And in the beginning, you kind of have to do both, right? You do have to be the employee, like you're saying. You do have to figure out where
yeah,
am I, like what color, where am I going to get my material from? You do have to do all that employee stuff. And you also have to like visionary and, have time. And I call it like CEO time. Like, are you setting aside CEO time like you are setting aside this kind of the to-do stuff, the nitty-gritty stuff that needs to get done? And also like the CEO time is just as important because like you say, I mean, you'll wake up, you'll pull your head up 3 years later and you're like, What has happened?"
100%. I mean, the book E-Myth, I don't know if you've read
Mhm.
E-Myth
Yeah.
by
Mhm.
Michael Gerber. He explained it so perfectly because it's the whole concept of, I don't know if it came from him, this whole concept of in the business and on the business, but that's just it. You open a business and you get stuck in the weeds and you just don't have the time. And even when you have the time, you're just not thinking in that way to think, okay, where are we going, Captain? Where's the ship going? Are we going this way or that way? And what do we need to do to to head in that direction?
Yeah. I was gonna say, no, just real life construction, family business. Spoken from true experience. But, that was one of the things that I always would have conversations with my dad and my uncle about. Is like, we've got to get away. When you think, and this comes from, here we go back to like, what is the real core of this? This is scarcity. Because when
Mm,
you think you don't have time to get away from your business, that is a scarcity mindset, right? versus how is my time away from my business for 2 days to think, to ponder. I don't know what book I read
Yeah,
it in, but they were
yeah.
talking about how Steve Jobs used to take off like 6 weeks a year, like in a concentrated time, and he would just ponder and he would think. And we, at least in the Western world, I don't know how this is in UK and Europe, but it's like we live in such a fast-paced, we value doing over thinking and pondering and visioning, that we think that that is not as valuable. But I mean, I think that's even more valuable, because you get to get out of it, and you get to think about, and you get to see it from a more clear-headed, versus when you're so focused and you're so, you can't, like the saying, like the forest between the trees, like what can you actually see because you're so in it, versus thinking about and pondering, like am I, and like you said with the pilot is constantly checking, like he's or she is having to constantly go back to, you know, get us right back on track. And how often are we doing that as business owners?
And I think, it's it's so fundamental because when you think of a business owner who is going on a path, so they started and they have their day to day, they have their clients or customers, and then when you compare that business owner who then takes the time out to understand where, and it's not, I know we talk about money and data a lot, but it could just be time. It could just
Mhm.
be
Yeah.
how much time. So you can have that thinking or evaluate that scenario and then at some point make changes, and then in 10 years you have the difference between this business owner who is still plugging away on their own, doing what they do, not making enough money, and not having the right kind of balance in terms of clients or products or what they're selling. And then you have this business owner who is, they spend the right amount of time, they've got great people involved, it's been hell getting there, but they've had to make that investment because they knew this was what they were working towards, and they're making the return that they planned or hoped they would make, and that's the difference.
Yeah. Chidi's talking and I'm like, "Yes." Mhm. Just like I'm just shaking my head. Yes, yes, yes. And we can just wear ourselves out, right? Because we aren't thinking, like you're saying, we aren't thinking about the end goal. And also, here we go back to, I think a lot of business owners get their value and their identity in how busy they are. And,
Mm,
you know, they love to talk about, how busy they are or all the problems that they're having. It's almost like a bragging right,
yeah.
versus talking about how amazing your business is, or how much time you have to think, or like we just aren't that society yet where we talk about all of the things that are amazing in our life and in our business, versus it's almost like the misery loves company kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah. And I think what came to my mind when you say that, Erin, is linking back to something you mentioned earlier, where we're saying that a lot of business owners would have started from professional careers
Mhm.
and they flipped onto business. And some of these professionals at the time, they had great jobs. Some of them had teams. Some of them had, company cars. Some of them had offices, and they had all these things. And now you flip to being a business owner, and you believe that the life of a business owner must be hard, and it must be,
Mm.
and don't get me wrong, it is hard. But I
Effort.
think, yeah, correct. But
Yeah.
the aspiration should,
Mhm.
especially now when there's so much tech, there's
Mhm.
so much, there's opportunities with resourcing, with support, with offshoring. There's a whole lot of suite of resources available to the business owner that if you have that in mind, you can tap into these things and you should have a better life, right?
Yeah.
Than you had when you were employed.
Yeah. I think that goes back to, I always come at it first from it, because we live in an inside out world, right? Like your body, your chemical makeup inside your body is used to struggle, like you're talking about in the 9 to 5,
Mhm,
right? You're
mhm.
used to stress, you're used to. And so flipping that and not being stressed all the time, your body's like, what the heck? No, we need to serve you up some stress. And so if you're not aware of this, you will continue to stay in the cycle. What came to me while you were saying that is what I hear a lot of times is they don't know what they don't know. So how does that how do we have that knowledge transference to all of the people that either want to start a business or are on their journey or, in the midst of it? How do we transfer that knowledge? And I mean, I know it's everywhere, and also it's like, I think that can be overwhelming at times too.
For me, I think that, and it feels like this is just, we're just peeling the same onion here. Being clear on what you want to achieve,
Mm,
right? It will force decisions because this is it's bespoke for every situation. So I'll give you another example. I spoke to a guy who is a fitness instructor. Okay, so he's a fitness instructor in the gym. So all
mhm,
his clients in the gym, we said, okay, how, what do you want to do? Where's this going? How much do you want to make? He says, oh, I want to make 100K a year. That's in pounds. And I want to buy a flat. I want to go on holiday. Okay, fine. So now let's play with the numbers. And by the time we play with the numbers, we come up with a figure that your business needs to make
generate
to
first
before you
before you
get,
take
because you've got
home
to pay taxes,
100.
you've got to pay costs, yeah. And let's say that number is 300K. So the question now is, can you make 300K in the gym? He says, I can't. And then it's like, okay, so what are you going to do about that? And so all of a sudden, not for me, but he's coming up with all these ideas. Oh, I could go
Mhm,
online, I could sell programs, or I can rent a space. I can get other trainers to come and train, and so that's just from thinking about our
mhm.
destination. And then what could happen is this guy, 10 years down the line, he then has a scenario where maybe he has a spot he's rented there. He's got these guys going to train here and he's earning money from them. He's got these people he's coaching, doing online programs for, and he's playing golf on a Friday. Whatever the scenario. But this is
Mhm.
what we have to think about, not just money, but also time, but also a headspace. Because the more stuff you have going on, the more stressed out you be, but uh, the more working processes you have in place around your business, be it finance and be it everything else, the better your life will be.
Yeah. You said clarity, and you've said that numerous times. And I think if you haven't been around business, 100K does not equal 150K from a business, like that's such a good example that you gave, like 3.5 times, 4 times. I mean, like actually sit down and do the numbers. But I think a lot of times because we aren't clear, because we don't sit down, because our ego loves fuzziness and not clarity, we don't do that exercise to, like you're saying, to actually figure out, okay. And that doesn't mean he's going to have this other gym and he's going to have all these group programs and he's going to all to have that right now today. But
Mhm.
like you're saying, he is going to be working towards, it's kind of like when I
Yeah.
sit down, it's like, what is going to move the needle today
Mhm.
versus staying in that rat race, I guess is what I
Yeah,
would
yeah,
call
yeah,
it.
yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Is there anything else that you want to add that maybe I haven't asked or we've talked about that you want to share with the listeners?
So, good question. When we talk about companies going bust, and it's not anything anyone else wishes. Number one is an idea that the market doesn't want. So we talked about a little bit about being clear, just rethinking your offer, right?
Yes.
Before you go out to the market and see what is right for you. But number two on the list of where companies go bust is cash.
Mm,
And so for me, cash flow is is a thing that affects a lot of business owners, and it's a real try. I've seen it before. I've seen. Uh, I've had a client who was making money, but they just ran out of cash. They're making money. You got a service that people are buying from, and then you somehow just run out of cash, and then you go under, and that's a real tragedy. So it's always it's one of those things I'm very passionate about, that business owners need to find a way, looking in your bank account and seeing how much money you have left is not good enough. You need to find a way of forecasting, looking forward into the future, and trying to predict um, what's going to happen cash wise. And the bigger you get, the more difficult it is, or like, because when you're small, it's fine. I know this client's going to pay, this client's going to pay. I've got to pay that, I've got to pay that. Even without looking in my bank account, I know roughly where I'm standing. But once your revenue and your costs start increasing, all these things become a bit unclear as the timing of when you get money and when you pay money out starts to vary. You can come unstuck.
So is it a not paying attention and a not forecasting, like what you just said, like a discrepancy in accounts receivable and accounts payable, that kind of thing? And also, is that, let me just ask that question. Is that more so what it is? Is you're not
Correct.
being aware
Yeah.
and paying attention to what
Yes.
your spread is from what's going out versus when it's going to come in?
Correct.
Which then makes me think then you don't have a lot of cash reserves either.
No, but they could, because the thing is, you know, once you start, and I'm kind of digressing here. When I see business owners that are doing well, you see the investment in the P&L, right?
Yeah.
Because you on the balance sheet, because you're seeing, sorry, too many accounting terms there,
No.
but because you're seeing people are taking loans, people are spending money on marketing, people are buying equipment. There's a lot of investment that goes in. But some people are buying vans, like. But sometimes when you start doing all these things, when the money is going out, it's harder to then be sure how much cash will I have in 3 months' time when I've committed to buying this, or or I've bought this and I've deferred the payment, or I've got my taxes coming, and so all these things, it could just hit you at once, right?
Yeah.
Without warning.
It's the planning. I wrote down how many of them are reinvesting back into the business,
Yeah,
which is great. And also, are you reinvesting at a my husband does not like this word because he thinks it's overused, sustainable rate. But
yeah,
like, are we reinvesting too aggressively from where our cash flow is? And also I wrote down the person that has already achieved where you're trying to go, would they be making decisions from that place? Like that is also what I think about is,
yeah,
would you be buying a van and all of these things? Like sometimes I think if you're not used to having money, like just the act of having money, I think
mm,
with our relationship with money, depending on what it is, money comes in and then money can go out as quickly versus having money. And here we go back to conditioning, I think, with the financial world of like, yes, we do want to lower our taxes as much as what we can, but
yeah,
sometimes having cash in the bank and just paying our taxes is okay too. Just
mm,
like
mm,
not trying to lower our taxes and buy equipment, right? Like there were times that the decisions that we decided to make were, you know what, we're just going to pay a little bit more tax, but we're going to have a lot more cash in the bank
yeah, yeah.
versus trying to do that right off. And now we have all of this equipment just because we're trying to avoid the tax. Does that make sense?
Yes, no, no, 100%,
Okay.
100%, 100%. And I think it's always one, because I'm here to save. I'm here to give my clients more of their money.
Yeah.
That's one of my goals. But at the same time, I think if your sole purpose is to is to reduce tax, then we've got it wrong. You want to try and be as efficient as possible, but your main purpose should be trying to make more money,
You
trying to
I'm
build your
so
business.
glad you said that because so many business owners think what you
Yeah,
just said, right? It's like, I
yeah,
want to minimize my tax. It's like, here we go back to scarcity. Like, no, how do we just
yeah.
create more money?
Just
And, the idea of the taxes, like I'm not saying, just, oh, it's totally fine that you miss all of these, tax breaks and things of that sort. And also not so focused on how do I pay the minimum amount of taxes that I'm
Yeah.
either not invoicing and I'm trying to push that off to next year. Like, that
Yeah.
happens a lot in the construction industry. And it's just like, you've got to, like, I love that you said that, because it's not how do we minimize taxes, which is scarcity based. It's how do we create more money, which is such an abundant mentality.
No, 100%. I've had clients in the past where all they keep coming at me is, can I claim this? Can I? No, you can't. Can I, what about this? What if I do this? And what if I do this? No, you can't. What if I do this? And what if I, it's like, dude, use this energy and this intelligence to focus on how we can do more, how you could build that better life for yourself.
I love that you said this, because it's such, I mean, I'm going to say it again, but it is the difference between a scarcity mentality of how can I minimize, how can I shrink, how can I, keep everything. And I didn't say this before, but some of us are building our businesses from fear. Some of us
Mm,
are building our business from, I don't want to go back to that job, or I don't want to pay this much in taxes, or I'm afraid that if I make this choice, then, we make these decisions from fear. And when I say love, I just mean expansive and growth and abundance. And so
mm,
asking yourself those questions about, like Chidi's saying, when you're making decisions, is this an expansive decision, or is this coming from a fear-based place?
agreed. Agreed.
Oh, I love it. Thank you, Chidi, for your time. It was so fun. Tell me, where can people find you,
So
learn about
I'm
you?
Chidi Egbujie on LinkedIn, but
Okay.
also virtual focus accountants.co.uk. You
Okay.
can find that's my website. You can Chidi at virtual focus accountants.co.uk is my email address.
Okay. I'll put all that in the show notes. He also has an ebook that I downloaded because I wanted to learn about, I know it's UK based, but I'm always like, let
Yes.
me know all the things. And so he also has that if you're interested in learning about that. So I'll put everything in the show notes. Thank you, Chidi, for sharing your
Thank
time with us.
you. Thank you. It's been fun.
Yeah. Until next time.